called me Lot 7. Not even a name on the tag, just the number, stenciled in red oxide above the cage door and below it, in the auctioneer's clipped notation, scrap tier, non-viable royal stock, faded bioluminescent marks, recommend materials only assessment. I had read it upside down through the bars on the first morning. By the third morning, I had stopped reading it. By the sixth, I had stopped looking at the door altogether. Keith's depot smelled of machine oil and recycled atmosphere, and the particular dry cold they kept in the lower auction halls to slow spoilage on biological lots. I was a biological lot, that was the whole of what I was. In that place, weight, volume, a faint residual luminescence along the gill lines of my jaw that had once marked me as a daughter of the Vea theory. Royal line and now marked me as diminished stock. Glow gone pale as old bone from 6 weeks in a hold with no sun and no salt water. I had been told, not unkindly, by the floor assessor that the marks might recover if I were purchased by someone with appropriate facilities. He had also told me the bids were coming in at ore weight equivalent. 11 kilograms of processed veolite. That was what I was worth on the floor of Keith's depot. I had stopped crying on day 2. I want to be clear about that. By the time the bidding opened on the 7th morning, I was composed. My back was straight. My hands were still. I had decided that whatever they did with Lot 7, they would not have the satisfaction of Viathi. The hall was half full for the opening session. I watched them come in. 6-7 species I could name, 2 I couldn't. All of them with assessment tablets and the flat, professional eyes of people who buy things for a living. None of them looked at my face. They looked at the gill marks, tilted their heads, made notes. One of them held a light source that closed the bars and watched the marks fail to respond and wrote something that I did not need to read to understand. The human came in last. He was not remarkable to look at. Medium height, hair gone mostly gray at the temples, a jaw that had been broken at some point and set slightly off true. He wore a salvage inspector's rig, the dark canvas vest with the equipment loops, the kind of thing you saw on the independent operators who moved through mid-rim depots buying wreck parts and surplus materials. He carried a tablet, but he wasn't looking at it. He was looking at the room the way a man looks at a room when he is counting exits. Not from fear, just from old habit, a veteran's habit. I had known enough soldiers in the court at home to recognize the posture. He stopped at Lot 4, moved on. Stopped at Lot 6, made a note. Stopped at my cage and did not look at the marks. He looked at my face. I held his gaze because I was Vathi, and I was not going to look away first. He didn't look away either. He just studied me with a calm that felt entirely different from the assessor's calm. Theirs was the calm of someone tallying a column of figures. His was the calm of someone trying to understand what he was seeing. Then he crouched down so that his eyes were level with mine through the bars. No one else in that room had done, and he said quietly, "What do they call you?" I said. "Lot 7, he said. "That's not what I asked." The auctioneer was watching from the podium, with the expression of a man who has learned to let buyers do whatever they need to do before the bidding opens, as long as they do it quickly. The other buyers had glanced over and glanced away. There was nothing remarkable about a human crouching as a cage. There was nothing remarkable about anything happening in that hall, to any of them. That was the worst of it. Not the cruelty, which would have at least acknowledged I existed, but the total ordinariness of it. I was inventory. Inventory is not remarkable. I told him my name. I don't know why. I had not told the assessors or the floor staff or the 2 buyers who had addressed me directly to ask about my marks recovery timeline. I had given them Lot 7 and a straight spine and nothing else. But something in the specific quality of his stillness, the way he asked as if he genuinely expected an answer, as if the answer was information he required rather than a pleasantry he was performing, pulled it out of me before I had decided to give it. "Vaethi," I said. He nodded once, the way a person nods when they have learned something they intended to learn. He looked at the gill marks then, briefly, but not the way the assessors had looked. Not calculating, just observing. Then he stood and walked to the auctioneer's podium. I watched him speak. I could not hear the words from the cage. I watched the auctioneer's eyebrows rise, and then his shoulders do a small, careful shrug that meant it's your coin. I watched the human sign the pre-bid materials form and hand over a chip. I watched the auctioneer stamp the form, The bidding for Lot 7 lasted 40 seconds. He was the only bidder. He came back to the cage with a floor attendant and the release key, and I stood up and made myself ready for whatever came next. I had not let myself think about whatever came next in 6 days, because the options available to Lot 7, at the materials assessment end of a mid-rim salvage auction, did not bear sustained examination. About now, in the 12 seconds it took the attendant to work the lock, and I kept my face still, and my back straight, and I was Vathi, and they would not have her. The door opened. He stepped aside, not back, aside, not away from the cage, positioning himself to receive what he'd purchased. Sideways, out of the doorway, leaving it open and unobstructed. I stood in the threshold for a moment that I could not measure. The hall beyond him was bright. They kept the transaction floor well lit, and the light came in around him and fell across my hands, and the faded lines along my jaw, and I felt the faint, irrelevant warmth of it. He was looking at the middle distance. Not at me, giving me the doorway and the light and the moment, without asking for anything back from them. I walked out. He fell into step beside me. Not ahead, not behind, and we walked toward the depot's transit corridor without speaking. At the corridor threshold where the auction floor's recycled cold gave way to the warmer processed air of the public level, he stopped, and I stopped with him. He said, "I filed the release under the Keithis non-commodity exemption. It means the sale is void, you're not property, and I have no claim on you. You can go wherever you need to go." He reached into the equipment vest and took out a small flat card and held it out. "That has a credit line on it. Not charity. It's a bond against what was done. If you want to contact your court, there's a guild relay 2 levels up. If you want to disappear instead, that works too." I looked at the card. I looked at his face. I said, "Why did you ask my name?" He considered that. He was not a man who answered quickly, and I had already come to understand that about him. That the pauses were not hesitation but thought. "Because," he said, "you were the only one in that hall who was looking back." I took the card. My hand was steady. I did not go to the guild relay that day or the next. I am not certain I can explain, even now, precise sequence of decisions that led from that corridor to where I eventually went. I can say only that when you have been weight and volume and a fading mark on an assessor's form, and one person asks what you are called, asks it plainly without transaction behind it, without wanting anything from the answer, it changes the coordinates of a thing inside you that you had not known was navigating. I found out later that he had paid 46,000 depot credits for Lot 7. 46,000 against 11 kilograms of Veolite. I never asked him to account for the difference. He never offered to. That was, I think, how I knew that neither of us needed to.